Atrazine and DDT. Boy, that really sounds like fun to talk about, doesn't it?
I think so, because you know what? These are two products that absolutely change the world for the better. And you may say, wait a minute, now all I've heard about DDT is bad things, and aren't we having some issues with the EPA with atrazine? Well, yeah, that's what you're hearing about, but what you aren't hearing about is how these two products have really helped the world raise better crops and be a lot safer place to live.
Yeah, and the reason why we're bringing this up today is right now atrazine is under review again. They're going to end up most likely restricting the label with atrazine. And here's the whole problem. Let's start with the atrazine talk, then we'll get to the DDT. With atrazine, it can leach pretty easily through the soil. So if, as a farmer, you over-apply it, or you apply it on soils that, quite frankly, you probably shouldn't, then what's going to happen is it could move through the soil and end up in groundwater somewhere. Now, when it ends up in groundwater, that's not a good thing, simply because people don't like foreign materials in their water. But let's face it, when you look at the safety of atrazine, it's actually as safe as table salt.
Well, safety with pesticides is certainly a concern. Now, when you look at atrazine and you make a safety claim, it's important just to look at the numbers. And the government has done a lot of research on all the different pesticides that are out there. Atrazine, for example, has an LD50, which means the lethal dose to kill 50% of whatever test population they're using, whether it's rats or something. Well, the LD50 on atrazine is 3,000 milligrams per kilogram. Let's just equate that to table salt, which is also 3,000 milligrams per kilogram. So you'd have to take as much table salt as you would atrazine if it were to kill something. Now when you're looking at something else that we take every day, let's look at caffeine. If you're drinking a soda or a cup of coffee or something like that, you say, wait a minute, don't tell me this stuff is dangerous. It's not really dangerous. It all comes down to the dosage. With caffeine, the LD50 is only 200 milligrams per kilogram. So it would take 15 times less caffeine to kill you than it would atrazine or table salt.
So when we start talking about atrazine, and once you realize, it's just as safe as table salt, but here's the thing. Again, nobody likes seeing atrazine in the water. People freak out about that, even though it's probably not a big deal. And as farmers, we don't want to end up with atrazine in the groundwater. So again, if you're a farmer, we want you to understand, use atrazine the right way. Only use a half a pound per acre or less. Only use it post-emerge. Do not use it pre-emerge. Use it in situations where you really need it. If you don't really need it, use something else. Okay, then we can preserve atrazine and we don't have to have the government on our backs all the time. Because here's the thing, if they get rid of atrazine, if they ban atrazine, what are they going to ban next? As farmers, we have to do the very best we can so the public understands we're trying everything to make sure their food and water supply is the safest and most abundant in the world, which it is right now, but still we've got this concern there with atrazine, and it all comes down to it leaches pretty easily.
Well, we've got to regulate ourselves and how we use products like atrazine. Now there's one product that we can't regulate ourselves anymore. It's DDT. It's something that's basically been outlawed in many corners of the world. There's still some places that'll use some DDT. But it was really interesting reading up on DDT, and it's something that I challenge you to do as well. Look at DDT and how it was used back in, say, the 1940s, and look at the world that we had to live in at that time, how common malaria was, even in North America. And basically, diseases like yellow fever and malaria were completely wiped out on our continent because of widespread DDT use. Now,
the biggest problem, though, was people just didn't realize that it wasn't safe to just douse human beings with it. Literally, people were taking baths in DDT just so they wouldn't have mosquito bites and that kind of thing. But here's the deal, back in those days, if you did have mosquito bites, you had different bugs coming after you, especially in some of these foreign countries like Vietnam and Korea, things like that, where they're just inundated with bugs and inundated with disease. You had great risk of getting malaria or yellow fever or something else, and that would kill you. So yes, there were a few human beings that got injured or maybe even killed from DDT, but because DDT was used, the point is thousands, tens of thousands of lives were saved. So at the time, when people really didn't know any better, you say, okay, well, would I rather trade a few lives for tens of thousands of lives? And they decided to do that.
Well, in the meantime now, in modern days, there have been a lot of new pesticides discovered, a lot of new insecticides that have been used that can control insects very safely, and widespread use of certain insects now in a controlled use would be a good idea in some of these areas. Brian and I traveled down into Brazil. Well, before you could go to Brazil, if you wanted to get anywhere close to the Amazon region, you needed to have a yellow fever shot because it's still a big deal. They were very concerned about malaria and what you do if you start getting symptoms of malaria. Well, I don't know. I just don't have to think about those things here. And when you look at insecticides that could be used, there are things like the pyrethroid form of insecticides.
Like Tempo, Warrior, Silencer, some of those types of products. They could do a great job on a lot of these same insects, much safer to humans, much safer to animals. So we do have options out there. There is one thing I wanted to throw out on DDT that I thought was the most interesting just reading up on it. Did you know that the Rockefeller Foundation, years and years ago, they decided that they wanted to try to wipe out malaria and yellow fever across the entire world? And so they spent lots of money, millions of dollars trying to do that. But after a while, they realized the world's a really big place. If you're going to spray it all, that would take an enormous amount of money and effort and manpower, and they just couldn't get it done. They had to abandon the project. But I do think it was fantastic that we, in our country at least, were able to eliminate yellow fever and malaria. That was thanks to DDT.
Look, we're not saying that all these products are especially safe, especially something like DDT. But what we are saying is when products are used correctly and safety precautions are taken, there are a lot of good things that can be done with pesticides.
Especially nowadays with the way the EPA has handled things. A lot of the dangerous products are now off the market here in our country. They might still be labeled in other countries, but they're off the market here in our country.
And there is a product that's pretty darn safe, Atrazine right now, that's just as safe as table salt is. And when public concern about a pesticide gets so great, the EPA sometimes makes political decisions rather than common sense decisions. And that's something that, as farmers, we need to use atrazine wisely so we don't get it taken away.
Well, one thing that atrazine is nice for is helping out on our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to stop this tough weed on your farm coming up later in the show.